You might be surprised to learn that prosecutors frequently charge women who kill their abusers with murder. In fact, 1/3 of all women incarcerated for killing someone have suffered abuse from that person around the time of the killing. Tonight, I'm talking to journalist Lauren Gill, who wrote about one of those cases for The Intercept. Tracy McCarter is charged with murder and facing 25 years to life in prison for killing her estranged husband, James Murray. Tracy is black, her husband was white. Murray had a long history of abusing Tracy that prosecutors failed to take into account when they charged her and didn't tell the jurors when they presented the case to the grand jury. Thanks so much for being here tonight, Lauren.
Thank you.
All right, so Tracy McCarter, she's charged with second-degree murder and, if convicted, faces 25 years to life in prison for killing her estranged husband, even though there was a substantial history of abuse. Can you give us more background into who Ms. McCarter is and her relationship with Mr. Murray?
Sure. So Tracy McCarter met James Murray in 2013. They were both living in Texas and met through a dating site there. They dated for a few months, and Murray moved to New York City. McCarter follows the next year. They started seeing one another as friends again, and then they rekindled their relationship, and they got married in May 2019. Now, Murray struggled with alcoholism throughout the relationship, and he would get violent when he drank, according to her lawyers and people close to McCarter that I spoke to. He would do things like kick, punch, and choke her, and he was in and out of rehab for years, but he was ultimately unable to stay sober. The couple eventually separated in the fall of 2019, but, McCarter still loved him and wanted to help out when she could. So in March 2020, Murray calls her up. He sounds drunk. And she agrees to let him spend the night at her apartment so he could sober up. According to court filings, Murray gets physical with McCarter. She holds out a knife, and he kept coming towards her, and the knife pierces Murray's chest. She immediately calls 911 and is trying to save Murray, applying pressure to the wound. About 10 police officers arrive, and they actually arrest McCarter, and Murray's pronounced dead. And then Manhattan DA Cy Vance charges McCarter with second-degree murder, and she's held on Rikers Island at the peak of the pandemic without bond for 6 months, and then she's eventually indicted for second-degree murder by the grand jury in September.
Now, you say it's uncommon or not uncommon for prosecutors to charge women who kill their abusers with murder, and they're rarely successful in arguing self-defense, especially when the woman is black and her abuser is white, as is the case here. Tell us more about those statistics, please.
Yeah, so we know that in the criminal legal system, the odds are against black women who kill white men. According to a 2014 analysis, just 2.9% of black women like Tracy McCarter were found to be justified in their killings of white men, meaning that they didn't face charges. And this is compared to 13.5% of white women who killed black men. And we also know, generally speaking, that it's pretty clear that women who fight back against their abusers aren't protected by the criminal legal system. And, that's especially black women.
Now, the Manhattan DA presented Tracy's case to the grand jury, and they voted to indict her, but the prosecutor didn't tell the grand jurors about her husband's history of abuse. Her lawyers are now challenging that omission because they say a DA has a duty to present evidence that would materially influence a grand jury. Now, this struck me because I think of all the police killing cases where prosecutors present evidence supporting the defense's arguments that their clients, the police, were justified in their actions. There does seem to be a double standard here. What are your thoughts on the outcome of the defense attorney's appeal?
Right. So right now, a judge is deciding whether to dismiss the indictment because a prosecutor didn't, present this evidence about the abuse to the grand jury. The prosecution had evidence, including, an email from Murray himself admitting it, and a video in which you see Murray pulling McCarter's hair and grabs her somewhere above the shoulders. But prosecutors have told the defense, before the grand jury, hearing that the evidence wasn't substantial enough to warrant self-defense. Just an example of that, during one hearing, the prosecutor on the case actually says if the video shows that McCarter was choked, it wouldn't have been for that long. So, that's really in line with how the prosecution has been minimizing the abuse from the beginning of the case. And from the lawyers I've spoken to, it seems incredibly rare for judges to dismiss an indictment because prosecutors left out favorable evidence, to the defense. And that's because prosecutors generally are afforded great discretion in what they present to the grand jury. And, because of that, that's really an area that's in need of reform. And I think Tracy McCarter's case is really emblematic of that.
What's crazy is that when I was practicing criminal defense here in Texas, we were able to present our side of the story to the grand jury, not in person, but through grand jury packets. They had to be written. And so we, made copies of them, at least 12 to 15 of them, and that was our way of getting our side to the grand jurors, and not put so much faith in the prosecutor's obligation to present that type of evidence that was favorable to us. Now, we know that Cy Vance is on his way out. Do you think the candidates currently running for Manhattan DA are likely to dismiss the charges and create a policy about prosecuting or not prosecuting domestic violence victims?
Yeah, so the primary for Manhattan DA is on June 22nd. I spoke to 8 of the 9 DA candidates, and all of them said that they were committed to introducing reforms to how prosecutors handle cases in which women fight back against their abusers. But, if we remember, Cy Vance was touted as a progressive prosecutor, and, his position on this case certainly contradicts that. So how far those promises go towards dismissing the case, I think really remains to be seen.
Now, where is Tracy? Because I know that she, due to the pandemic, had to stay at Rikers, and there was some issue with bail. And now this is a woman who has no criminal history whatsoever, who actually established a life there in New York, but somehow was considered a flight risk. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so Tracy McCarter's lawyers have asked for bail at least 5 times. Each time the prosecution has argued that McCarter is a flight risk because she has a nursing license that allows her to practice in Texas and that she has family outside of New York. So McCarter actually was released from Rikers in September on electronic monitoring. She's only allowed a few hours outside of her apartment each week. That's been another point of contention. The prosecution has argued, that she should have less time outside of her apartment. Even though, as we know, she hasn't been convicted of anything. So McCarter was in court today, and the judge denied her bail again. So she'll be back in court in August, and this will be an important court date. That's when the judge is expected to rule on the motion to dismiss the indictment. And if she decides not to dismiss it, that's when a trial date is expected to be set.
And I know that it's been a while for her to have some sort of, any traction on this case whatsoever. Do you think a trial date would be set sometime this year? If the judge doesn't dismiss the charge, that is.
Yeah, from speaking to her lawyers, it seems like they think fall at the earliest, but these cases go on, and so we'll see.
All right. Well, please check out Lauren's piece in the Intercept to learn more about Tracy's story, about some of the organizations working to end the criminalization of survivors of domestic violence, and where the candidates for Manhattan DA stand on the issue. Thanks again, Lauren.
Thank you.